Hey everyone. So today what we're going to do is we're going over the first missing positive integer. We're going to go over the UMPIRE method, and we're just going to go over the understand, match, plan part in this video. Next video will cover actual implementation. Let's start analyzing this prompt and really start to get through it. Given an unsorted integer array, find the first missing positive integer. So what's our key action? What are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to find the first missing positive integer. It doesn't say return, it just says find, but here it says return 3 in the examples. So sometimes that'll be really explicit. It wants you to return this data. What's our input? Well, an unsorted integer array. It doesn't say unsigned, so I know I'm going to get positive and negative numbers. And if you look at the example here, it looks like -1 and 1 are both in the input. So it's going to be a list in Python or an array in other languages. And what you have to do is find the first missing positive integer. So our output is going to be a positive integer. And our input, again, list of integers. So we're going to take a list of integers that are not sorted, they're not in any kind of order, and we're going to find the first missing positive integer, and then we're going to output that missing positive integer. Now, it says an extra thing down here. It says your algorithm should run in O of n time and use constant space. Now, do we need to start by doing that? No. What we need to start by doing is making a plan. And we don't need to worry about this other thing until, we've really got the algorithm figured out. Then we can start to figure out where are we using extra space, where we don't need to, and are there any shortcuts we can take, especially given the output. Okay, so what is the process? Let's think back. Have I ever done a problem like this before? Well, if you've only ever been exposed to the problems in this class, then no, you haven't done a problem like this before. But you have done a problem that has some similar shapes, right? Like, I know that we're going to have to check each number in our array. So it's very similar to the Excel problem in that we're going to have to loop over a sequence of things and check something about them. Also similar to the counting primes problem, we're going to have to loop over a sequence of integers, test them in some way, and then output something at the end. So given my match, I know that since I'm finding one thing, I probably need a variable up at the top to keep that one thing in. And then I know that I'm going to have a for loop probably in here somewhere. We don't have to worry about that, but I've got these hints now that I have those other problems that I can look back on. So I've kind of gone through the matching phase. I've thought about, okay, what are the problems I've figured out in the past? So now let's go through and let's walk through the problem and try to just do it ourselves. So it says given 1, 2, 0, return 3. So what that tells me is if all the integers up to a certain point are covered, you just return the next integer. Cool. Now, let's go through this one manually, just like I'm going to point at it with my mouse here. First number is 3, okay? The second number is 4. Okay, so we've got 3 and 4 covered, but 1 and 2 are not covered. -1, I don't care about -1, honestly, because it doesn't really affect which positive integer I'm going to be returning. So if I come up to a negative number, I'm just going to pretend like it's not there. I'm going to ignore it and move on to the next one. And then there's a 1. So in my mind, I've kind of got a couple of slots here occupied. But that's not good enough. I want to just write it down. So I'm just going to write here. I'm going to go, okay. So given this input, when I find 3, let's see, here's my starting point. I'll write the numbers down that I see there. and then I'll mark whether or not I've seen them. So, okay, I've seen 3, I'm just gonna mark it. Cool. And now I've seen 4, and I'm just gonna mark it. Just going in order over here. -1, ignoring. All right, I see 1, so I'm just gonna mark it. And now, since I've kind of put all those numbers in order, and I've like marked them, I can see that the first one is this. It's here. Okay, so that kind of gives me a hint of what can I do here, right? I've kept a list of positive integers based on the highest number of integers that I could find. So what I need to do next is think about how am I going to store that information such that I can always check to see if I've seen a number. And then how am I going to keep track of that? And then how am I going to keep track of whether or not I've seen it? There's a couple of data structures that we could use here. We could use an array, a list, or we could use a hash table, a hash map. In Python, they're called dictionaries. And what that allows us to do is, in constant time, access a list. So there's a couple of data structures that I might be able to use here, right? Like I've kind of made myself an example. And this example it's a sequence of numbers with sort of tick marks next to them, right? So these tick marks are pretty interesting. They're basically Boolean values. Whether or not I've put a tick mark there is basically true or false, right? And I just have a sequence of numbers that go in order. That's all I'm really keeping track of. I don't need to keep track of like more information than this. So what I might do is think of this as a list. Think of each number as an index in that list, and then try to just keep the list at a certain size, and then every time I find a value, I could just mark that list as a true or a false. And I already know its value because there'll be a position. Okay, and then I can kind of ignore all the negative numbers. They don't matter anyway. I know that basically, to write that down, in order to write that down, basically what we need to do is for every number in the input list, let's see, create a list, an empty list. For every number in the input list, if the number is larger than the current length of the list, resize the list to be of that length. And then let's see, another check that I need to ask is if the number is smaller than 0, ignore the number. And if the number is larger than the current length of the list, resize the list. Set the value of the place in the list to corresponding with that integer to true. Okay. Now, for every number in the input list, let's see, we do all the checks. We make sure we get rid of negative numbers. We ignore them. If the number is larger than the current length of the list, so, here we started with 3, right? And if we had an empty list and we tried to access index 3, it would say, that's out of range. So what we need to do is resize the list. And then we could actually just create a list rather than an empty list. Now that I'm thinking about it, create a list of length of the same length as the input list. That way, we're not going to run into a list that is going to be like longer by accident. And now, if you think about, there's this 8 here, but it's a -8, right? That might work. But we probably still need to like make sure that we can resize the list just in case you get a list that says like 4, 5, and 6, but then it's length 3, right? The first missing integer would be 1. So I guess like creating a list of the same length doesn't matter. Create an empty list. Now I've got some pseudocode.